Good afternoon and welcome to NYFP. In midday trade, the major stock averages remain higher with the Dow, Nasdaq, and S&P 500 all up by 1%. Joining me this afternoon to weigh in on the market action is Gregory Keating of James E. Coffey Securities. Good afternoon and thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, we did get some weaker than expected global flash PMI data, both manufacturing as well as services in some cases. And we also saw weakness in the U.S. PMI manufacturing figures. But some earnings did come in much better than expected, and we are seeing the equity averages higher. So do you think this will continue?
Yeah, it's kind of tough to gauge, right? I mean, you got those negative PMI flash readings out of both China and Europe, and particularly Germany. And you're seeing the Europe market rally on that. And I guess the expectation is that the meeting next week, the ECB will cut rates. So it's kind of a backwards way to look at it, I guess. But it's just that re-encouraging that the fact that the central banks do have the markets back.
And indeed, Greg, there are expectations that the ECB could cut at the May 2nd meeting. And also, as you mentioned, it's no surprise that we've been seeing a little bit of pressure and pullback in those global PMI manufacturing figures. Last week, the IMF also cut its global growth forecast. But we did get some better than expected figures out from the U.S., at least an improvement from the previous month in terms of new home sales. So given that we have more key data coming out later this week, including GDP, what can we expect on the fundamental side?
Yeah, definitely. We got positive new home sales today. Took a little bit of the sting out of the existing home sale number. That was a little disappointing yesterday. I think with the data coming out later this week, I think what really is the focus is the consumer, right? There's a lot to be made with the sequestration and the payroll tax being put back in effect at the beginning of the year. Will the consumer feel that need to spend, or will it have enough money to spend? With rising home sales, a rising stock market, and some cheaper gas, will that be enough for the consumer to start spending again? And in turn, will we get that positive, or will we get a surprise on the upside of that first quarter GDP number that we will get an estimate on Friday of?
And speaking of the consumer as well as sequestration, a lot of travelers across the country are starting to feel the pain with some of the travel delays in terms of flights. But overall, given that we do have global central bank support and we're getting more earnings out later this week, what sectors are you positive about and what sectors are you negative about?
Well, I mean, I think with the sectors, that's been interesting and why a lot of critics are expecting a little bit of a pullback is what's been driving the market are, typically defensive sectors, the healthcare, utilities, consumer staples. Until we can see, a change of leadership, I think, like technology. And we may get that today after the bell. Obviously, a lot of focus on the Apple earnings coming out after the bell. But I think there needs, in order for this market to continue to rise, you're going to need to see a transition from those defensive sectors to the more growth-oriented sectors.
And Greg, last but not least, before we wrap it up for today's segment, we'll be continuing to keep an eye on fundamentals as well as some technicals and, of course, Apple's quarter results after the closing bell. But is there anything else that you're paying attention to in this climate?
Yeah, I think just, basically the consumers, like I mentioned before. Will the consumer come back not only to the market, but also will it start spending again? Consumer sentiment, consumer confidence, coming out of University of Michigan. We're getting that on Friday. That's something to keep an eye on. Obviously, employment numbers coming out Thursday. Just keeping an eye on all the economic data, on our side of the pond and their side of the pond, too, is important.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for weighing in on the fundamentals today, and thanks for all your insight as always.
Thank you, Remy.